Well, thank you all for coming. Scott was asking how often we do this state of the school, and I thought the last time was when we merged. Things just generally run pretty smooth, so this is a big moment. So we thought we'd do a public state of the school and also get it taped, because I think some of the things I'll bring up are important for the broader Birchwood community. Plus, I don't know how many times I tried to think about how to approach this. The announcement is simple. Elaine and I, starting in the 24-25 school year, will move to resident founders in residence. How about that for a name? Which mainly means we'll still be driving, but from the back seat. Something on that order. And of course, Ryan Woolley, who really dropped into our laps literally over the last few years, then will be the head of the school. And so that'll be a pretty significant change. So my job tonight is, so here's Helene and I have been steering this for 40 years, and so our biggest concern was to assure the families, the community, and our staff that Birchwood will remain as Birchwood, only I think it's going to be better. And I hope through this evening I can sort of make that case to you. Because it's an unusual situation. Two people, along with a couple of other founding teachers, Lorraine Tseng, Linda Brown, started the school 40 years ago, and we're still doing it. And the two of them are still listening to me. That's big. And Noemi, you're not that far behind, so don't laugh at them. So it's quite unusual, and it's quite unusual the way the school has been formed and where it is today. And so what I'd like to do is to assure everyone that Birchwood will be the same tomorrow, only I think better. So we have to understand why we are where we are. How did Birchwood get to be Birchwood at this point? Because how we got to that point is going to be identical to where we're going to go from here. There's a process that's being followed. We have an excellent academic program. I think that's given. If you send your children here, you know that. And we have a very interesting and deliberate, purposeful character development program, which is, over the years, has proved itself to be very effective with the young people to get them ready for the future. So let me give you a little bit of an overview and an understanding of what we've done and how we got here, and then pretty much that's the way we're going to continue. So when we started this journey, we had a vision for emerging teenagers, children who were turning 12, 13, 14 years old, young adults. And our mission was a result of our desire to provide an academic training and a character training foundation that would launch them into their teen years. Not merely give an education to elementary and middle school, but to launch them with the kind of attitudes and behaviors and skills that will cause them to thrive in their teen years. The good work habits, good work ethic, attitudes about life, and their intellectual foundation, how to think, not merely moving through the curriculum, but how to think. So that when they got to their teen years, this would be a time to grasp the opportunities that the teen years present, and to face challenges, to manage hardships, all the teen struggles kids have today. But they would enter those years with their life in their hands, and they've learned some of the skills that would allow them to do that. So then by supplying students with the intellectual and character tools, we would prepare them, starting in their teens, for a life earnestly seeking a higher plane of life, which is a quotation from Hawken, attributed to a man named John Spalding nearly more than 100 years ago. But it represents how we wanted the children to feel when they left school. All right, it's the next stage of life. Doors wide open. I want to try this. I want to do that. That's what we had in mind when we started the school. So getting there, you should understand that Birchwood as it is now is not something new. We didn't create a different kind of education. Rather, it's a synthesis of what we considered was time-tested, research-based, benchmarked, and experienced strategies to work with children to create that young teenager. That's what we hoped for. So becoming Birchwood is not just an exceptional academic and character program we've established, it is a process. How did you put this thing together? Where did you get what you do? Because it's that process that allowed us to be here today. That's what we hope will continue in the future. It's the intersection of what history tells us about great education for great children and what science verifies. There's an intersection. And I found if you kind of read some science and they tell you X, Y, and Z about learning, and you say, well, I already knew that, it's probably true. That's the intersection between history and science. So that we'd end up with exemplary and flourishing children. So then there's our mission. That was to equip students for a life of becoming, growing, flourishing, and thriving through the development of their intellect and character. Now, so what then is the process? Well, we've got this mission, but the problem was every school has a mission. It's sitting on the third shelf of the principal's office or the headmaster's office. For us, when we started this, it was too serious because it was our own children we're working with and the children of our friends. That's how we started the whole thing. So we're not going to play with highfalutin words. It's got to work. It's got to work so when our children are leaving 8th grade and entering into high school, they are premier students. Maybe they're really smart, maybe not, but they know how to conduct themselves, they have goals for their life, and they're going to make the most out of those years. So what we do as Birchwood then, as educators, we pursue that intersection of history, science, and our experience. This is another unusual thing about the school. Until this year, Helene and I were still in the classroom. In fact, I still am. 5th grade LA, 5th grade math, and I help in 3rd grade math. I can't get away with it and out of it, and neither will some of the teachers let me. So we embraced what's effective, what works. You know, you could read articles in an educational magazine, you can see trends in education, but until you go into the classroom and try it with a 3rd grader, with a 5th grader, with a 7th grader, with an 8th grader, it all can just be talk, nothing more than that. So our experience has played a big part in that. Research-based, time-tested, benchmark, and we verify it with the experience that we have. This is what needs to continue, is this process of exploring, trying, applying, validating. This works. It's that whole process that we feel is effective. Now, you're probably, many of you sent your children here, or teachers are teaching here. How do we know we're on track for what we're doing? So we claim students turn 13, 14, they're headed off to high school. What kind of kids are you sending off? You say you want to prepare them for their teen years. Well, we have a lot of testimony. You can go onto our website and read the results from the students, how they end up doing in high school. I mean, I've already checked with many of the current 9th graders, and it's a consistent testimony. We're way ahead of the other kids. Sometimes intellectually, that's really dependent more on DNA than it is your training, but almost across the board, their ability to work hard, be disciplined, manage their time, all the things that are going to make them successful regardless of their intellectual ability. In fact, just the other day, I was taking my walk in the Metro Park, and some guy was doing pull-ups, and he waved to me, and I looked, and I said, I'll be darned. It's one of our graduates. And he had gone from Birchwood, he went to St. Ignatius, he became the valedictorian, he went to University of Michigan, he got his master's from Stanford, and I said, this is just terrific. He's doing a startup here now in Cleveland. And so I said, this is great. And I was ready to leave, start my walk again. He says, Mr. D, wait. He said, I just want you to know the kind of person that I am had its greatest impact was at Birchwood School. And that's after going to all those schools. Now, of course, our academics can't compare to any of those. But the point being, this is not unusual. We get this kind of feedback from the students, and I need it, to be honest with you, because I don't want to be shooting my mouth off that we do X, Y, and Z, and it cannot be validated. So there's many, many more stories like that. In fact, this year being our 40th, we'll be making a conscientious effort to collect all those stories. Okay, so how do we learn? How do we start all of this? And I don't know how long I'll go. You'll kind of depend on your attentiveness. If you start dozing off, I'll know when to stop. From the very beginning, what did we do? We started searching, reading, studying, and visiting. The very first year and a half, we visited public schools, we visited private schools. Everywhere that we could learn something about reading, about writing, about all the other subjects, we went to see if what they're doing is real. And that began the whole process. So then when we began to lay the foundation in the early years, that's how we look. Does it work? We don't buy into something if somebody reports it or it's a part of a magazine article. We buy it because we can see the results of what they're doing and what they're practicing. So here's the story that I will come away with tonight. We have been struggling, and I say this to our whole staff because they have been doing the same thing. You know, come to them frequently to identify what's time-tested, what's research-based, what's benchmarked, and what works in our experience. And how do we make our theory real? And then we practice it so that we can nurture children in their preparation for their teen years. Our assessments in my classroom, now that I'm doing math again and I'm doing language arts again, I've asked the teachers already, when I'm working in math, they're at this point, and I expect them to be there. If they're not, that's my fault. If I teach writing and I haven't helped them grow as writers, that's my fault. That's the responsibility that we started with in the beginning, that we wouldn't invent things, we wouldn't imagine things, we wouldn't brag about things, they had to be real. So I'm going to give you a few examples from our history. I'm going to start with what I'd like to do is show you a few elements of the school that you understand today, go backwards to explain where they came from, and then go forward to explain how we've already passed them off to other teachers. And that's a big part of will be the big part of the success. So when we started, my sole background was in gifted education. I had set up the Willoughby Eastlake School System's gifted program, and I had implemented it, so I was steeped in that kind of research. So that's how we started. That's what we know. What we learned from the field of gifted education is a notion of talent development. Of course, gifted education, they're talking about people who will become renowned experts. But I recognized from the beginning, okay, they got it right. You find out where kids are at, you find out their ability, and from that point, you grow them. You give them the academics, you give them the character training based on where they're at. So I use that because we really started in 1982. That's when we were first being convinced by others that for sure we were the ones who ought to start this school. And so that got us thinking, and that was our beginning. And then for 1 year, Lorraine sang, Linda Brown, my wife, and I, we sat around week after week after week, plotting out how to do the curriculum so that it would be at the level that we expected it. We started with a little bit that I knew from gifted education, but that was the beginning. So now we're at a place, we use the word becoming. You've probably seen that in our literature. That's what our mission statement says. We're equipping children for a life of becoming, growing, flourishing, thriving through the development of the intellect and character. That's an unusual word. We educate for becoming. Because now we educate what? So you'll go to a good high school, and then you'll go to a good college, and then you'll get a good job. You'll make more money, or you'll find more prestige. All kinds of aims, but that was never the aim of education. Education was always intended to make people better people. And that's historic. I thought I'd pull a couple of excerpts that you might find interesting. In the 17th century, Comenius, who's considered the father of modern education, he wrote this: proper education of the young does not consist in stuffing their heads with a mass of words, sentences, and ideas dragged together out of various authors. Sounds like that prep for state tests, doesn't it? But in opening up their understanding to the outer world so that living stream may flow from their mind. You see the beauty of seeing children in this way. Just as leaves and flowers and fruit spring from the bud on a tree. Same way Horace Mann, you might be familiar with him, he popularized initially public education in the 1840s. And he wrote this about education, what it should be. We have to create schools that would develop Americans' innate capacities. He saw children as embryos of talent that might be quickened, to kindle the genius which will blaze forth in the poems of humanity. In other words, he saw every child as a poem, something beautiful to come forth. Well, you can see why we lean toward that. That's our hope. That's our work with all the children, is to turn out in this kind of way, flourishing like poems in all of humanity. Set this aside. So out of that, we developed what we call a success cycle. If you're going to become, and you're going to thrive in reading, thrive in math, thrive in writing, you're going to get better, you're going to grow, you're going to become more and more. One of the simple practices we came across was called what we call the success cycle. It means in every class, with every child, you put them on a level where they have to stretch a little bit. They have to work a little bit. But probably they're going to get there. Because when they get there, you tell them, what a great job. That's fantastic. You did a beautiful job. And you can imagine their faces. Just today I did it with my math group. We were doing problem solving. Oh, the beams. And then I put that star on the thing. I got it. I did it. Okay, that's a tiny thing. You accumulate that over 8 years. And over all the subjects, you're creating a whole concept. I'm successful. I can do stuff. I have self-worth. I know I can grow. All through understanding what that whole notion of becoming is and how it's acquired. The literature on a field called competency and motivation, and then also in the fields of self-determination. And I'm going through this a little bit name-dropping because I want to give you the impression how the amount of time and effort we have put in to create what we have. The field of competency and self-determination have identified, these are sciences, that human beings long to grow and become competent in their world. So when little children walk into the classroom, I've explained this to teachers hundreds of times, those are not vessels to be filled with something. Those are vessels to inspire, cause growth, because they're hungry to be good in your subject. Let me say that again. I don't care who you think your child is, they desire to be good in math, to be good in writing, to be good in reading, to be good in and all the other stuff. That's in them, the desire to be competent. So there's tons of research under that, and I'm going to fumble trying to bring in some of the research without boring you to death. There's tons of research to back this up. And then we come up with a simple practice. That's what we've done at Birchwood. The depth of understanding, in this case human nature, and then simple little practices that allow it to occur. Similarly, with our character development program. Sip again. We learned long ago from William James. Anybody know the name William James? Okay, good history lesson. 1890s, the father of modern psychology. So good character is the aggregate of habits, virtuous habits. As habits are formed, being thoughtful, being considerate, being kind, working hard, not quitting, these are habits. As those behaviors are made into a habit, you collect all the habits, and the habits become someone's character. That same thought wasn't just from the 1890s. As late as the 1990s and the early part of this century, Christiansen, who's at the Jubilee Center in England, Edith Hall, who's a professor in England. Among American scholars, Charles Duhigg and Roy Baumeister, all showed that the result of who a person is what has been built up in their habits. Okay, well you can see right away the implication's pretty significant. If we're going to raise kids who are enthusiastic about their future, they want to make something out of their teen years, they got to have habits. You can't start when they're 14 years old and tell them, you need to work hard. Too late. You're going to have to push against a lot of stuff that's already grown around them. Or, you know, when they're 14, you got to be compassionate. Yeah, sure, Mom, whatever you say. Has to be cultivated as a habit. So, from the very early on, we did simple things like our work here is rigorous. We challenge them, we set high standards. Why? Not because we want to prove how smart everybody is, but what do you have to do when things are tough? You got to organize your time. You have to manage yourself. You have to put things in order so you can achieve. You can't flip it all together in the last 10 minutes before you go to a class. And if you keep doing that all through elementary and middle school, take a guess what happens in high school. It's pretty hard to change that habit. So we do homework. I know we are against the grain when it comes to talking about homework. But if it's incremental, a little bit in the first, a little bit in the second, with purpose, we're building habits. You got to manage your time. Just yesterday, I had a talk with a little girl, and she was telling me, I have no time. It's all the homework. Okay, all right, let's take a look at your schedule. What time do you get home? And she said, 4 o'clock. I said, okay, let's block in all the things you like to do. When do you like to watch television? 7 to 8. Okay, block that in, television. When do you like to play video games? 9 to 10, no problem, block that in. Next thing she knows, she's got 3 hours to do an hour and a half of homework. It's a habit. You just pick it, and there's all kinds of skills that come with that habit. Again, what I want to impress you on is the extent of the theory that's behind it turned into practice that will make it realize it. Same thing, one of, at least there's, I know of two or three scholars, one being William Damon. Another, you may know the book Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Young people, William Damon points out, in their teen years is the time to think about who I want to become and how I want to impact my world. They're not too young. Yes, they're all screwed up in their head for at least 6 or 7 years. They're going to make every mistake you pray they don't make, and they're going to cause you embarrassment, and you're going to be frustrated with them, but that doesn't have to be their whole teen years. They can still be achieving, growing, reaching for things because of opportunities. So that kind of aspiration of who you want to become, and to think about it, to think about like a problem solver. Where do I want to go with my life? Even in my teens, what do I want to accomplish? It's not too soon. So what have we done in terms of practice? We have an opening. You know, if you think about how you live your life, a lot of how you live your life, there's a model going on in your head. I'm a grandpa many, many times over. I don't know how many times I think about, what's a grandpa supposed to do? And I try to conjure up thoughts, and different people go through my mind. That's how we function. We function by the models in it. So, what did we put in practice? At the very beginning of every day, there's 15 minutes of opening. And what do we do during that time? We read stories of great men and great women. And so every day, for 8 years, I don't know how many school days that tallies, they're hearing these stories. It's something concrete in the way of practice that we put in place. Why? To shape how they look at their life. By the end, you know, we have this, I have boys and girls write a legacy essay, we call it. And the legacy essay is a letter to the other students, what they should pay attention to. And it's striking how they want to tell the younger students the type of person they need to become, how hard they want to work. They tell them about the people they model themselves after. I hope, we watch a lot of excellent movies too. I want to be like Jackie Robinson. I want to be like Annie Sullivan, who helped Helen Keller. Those stories got put inside of them. And the point I'm making is that to inspire someone to live a purposeful life, you can't tell them when they're 15, you need purpose in your life. No, you missed the chance. And we have been jealous over forcing these practices from the time they're a little boy and girl. They hear it again and again and again and again as a practice. And I would probably note on both of these, this happens in all the classes. So a thought that Helene and I had 40 years ago, a whole bunch of teachers have it now. I'm sure nobody knows where it came from, but they all practice it. It's the same thing with the success cycle. Last year I had all the teachers write a brief essay. Tell me about the success cycle in your class. And I really didn't know what I was going to get. What did I get? Wonderful essays, one after another. What it looks like in the first grade in reading, what it looks like in the 7th grade in mathematics. Because these are practices that we handed down, we pulled out of all the research and all the theory, and then put it in a way that it's meaningful in the classroom and can be passed on to other people. Same thing with the purpose. It's that flow of thought from finding out what is real, what works, what's been proven, what is there in theory, and then how do we practice it? How do I make these little kids be as inspired about their life as William Wilberforce was about his? Well, there's ways you can practice, and I think that's critically important. Another part on that setting purpose, I have a time with my 8th grade students. It's called the Ben Franklin Initiative. And the whole time, we either watch movies or I read them stories, and we talk about the thinking that goes on in great people's minds. And the thinking that goes on in people that are not that successful. Why do we do that? Because again, it's the models that get into them. Today we're in the middle of watching The Miracle Worker, the story of Annie Sullivan, helping Helen Keller learn finally to communicate and to look at her drive and her insistence and persistence, even in the face of the parents. And today I asked them the question, because she had a terrible, terrible upbringing, Annie Sullivan did, in an asylum with a brother who died at age 11. It's tragic. And so I asked them, I said, why do you think Annie Sullivan had that kind of perseverance with Helen, where Helen's mother and father did not? They gave up on her. They were going to put her in an asylum. And then they could begin to see, we discussed and we talked, it was all the hardships of her life. Didn't break her down, didn't wear her out. In the end, Annie Sullivan says, they made me stronger. Well, are they going to rise up and be tough little boys and girls? Nah, they're going to forget about it, get in trouble in the hallway as soon as they leave class. I know that. But the point is, we're sowing. We've learned that kind of sowing is what works. So what do? That's our practice. And I think it's beautiful the way the teachers have picked it up and continue to do that. That's part of the assurance I have in going forward, is these things are not going to be lost because Helene and I are not here. What we have here is much, much more than what we are ourselves. I think I'm a good teacher. I'm jealous when the kids say they like Mrs. Tseng better. And nevertheless, we're pulling out. But the ideas that will produce those young people in their teens and the practices that have proven they work for 40 years, we know they're going to continue to work. I'll just mention a few more. I think you know where I'm coming from. So each of the subjects, I honestly could talk all night on this.
Yeah.
Well, 40 years, this is all you do. You better know what you're talking about. But it goes subject by subject. We did the same thing with writing. How do you teach writing? Check with history. What's time tested? You write. Whether you are Benjamin Franklin, who used to see the title of articles in the Philadelphia paper, try to write the article before he read it, and then he would compare what he did to the article. And he did that day after day after day after day. How did he learn to write? He learned to write by writing. Any of you read any of Stephen King's personal biography? Guess how he learned to write? He'd been writing since he was 8 years old. Gross stories. But anyway, he started when he was 8 years old. Frightening stories. So, and then of course there's lots of research. The Donald Graves, Lucy Calkins, Frank Smith laid down the groundwork. That's sort of the intellectual groundwork of what history already tells you. So guess what our writing program is? You write and you write and you write and you write. Week after week after week after week. Of course teachers have to go over all of that. That's a lot of work for teachers. But it works. Just to cite one, I told myself I don't brag a lot, but I want to brag. You know, last year we have here's this little dinky school, Birchwood. Came in second in the state in power of the pen. That means we're competing against schools that have 500 8th graders. We have what, 18? What does that tell you? We don't recruit the best writers in Northeast Ohio. Lorraine Zhang, Jen Seward, they made them by following general principles in theory and yet practicing. I had nothing to do with it. In fact, they didn't even know. One time you did invite me to come at one time. One time. And I started the program. I want you to know that.
You're welcome anytime.
I am certain. Yeah, okay. Reading's the same way. When we started reading, I don't know how many schools you visited, Helene, to find out who has outstanding reading programs. Now, what is reading? History doesn't argue about whether you should do phonics or whole language reading. That is not even in history. You learn to read to open your world. You learn to read to learn more about yourself and who you can become. You don't teach reading so you can pass the 3rd grade, what is it called, reading test? I don't want to say stupid, that's a bad word. But you know what I'm thinking. No, what does history tell you? We bring children into reading so that their world's open to them. You want to use phonics? Fine. You want to use whole language? Fine. You want to use both of them? That's fine. But you're creating something much bigger than just a process. Now the study's important. I'm in this. I remember a study when we first started reading. California threw out phonics instruction. They were for 10 years, they were among the top 3 states in the United States in reading instruction, the testing of their kids, where they scored. They threw out phonics. Within the next 20 years, they dropped to the bottom 3. It took 20 years for them to play with ideas. This is one thing we've always been careful of in education, is to avoid trends, avoid educational bandwagons. And now it's very interesting. Now they've made, the science of reading has made fabulous discoveries just in the last year. Phonics is important. Oh, I would have never thought. I mean, we made that decision 40 years ago. I should say Helene made that decision. No, you need both of them. And you know, so when she's out of reading now. Now you look at what Rhonda Sproul has done. My God, she's got 1,000 books in her classroom. Where do you put them all? What are the kids doing? Reading. And you look, you go to her partner, Laura Momoni, is just as bad as she is. The 3rd and 4th grade teachers were just gifts to the school. Their room is filled with books. Children thrill. We have half days where we have reading days. And you walk into the room, and here's all these kids they wear their pajamas, and they're sitting with a teddy bear or something like that, and they're reading all morning long. How many schools dedicate 3 hours to reading? Because it means something, and it's a practice that sticks with them. Again, I come to the same point. What we set up for reading was not done cheaply. Helene especially paid the price to study, to visit other schools, to find out what works, and to implement it, and to build it. The same thing is with the poetry show. Any of you go to the poetry show last year? Do you know how that started out? We crossed the street, and the library passed out some flyers to children who came to the after-school care and made them go to our poetry show, because otherwise they'd be in trouble, getting in trouble. So that was our first first round of the poetry show. And then it's grown. I mean, I like to brag about this. We've got 8th grade boys, 7th and 8th grade boys who love poetry, recite poetry publicly. Boys! Tell me that's not a miracle. No, there's an innate drive to love literature, love words, but it got brought out. And with practices, and poetry show being a central one. And of course, this last year, she won't tell you this, but she was a little bit irritated. Nobody gave her credit for how good the poetry show was last year. Which I said, honey, that's a great thing. They don't need you anymore. Not purposefully, but I went to that poetry show last year and I thought, whoa, this is the best it's ever been. It goes from forcing children to go to the poetry show at the library to 4 nights. All kinds of kids. And the 1st and 2nd graders had their kids doing choreography. And can you imagine 1st and 2nd graders standing up on stage reciting poetry to 200 people in the room? Well, they don't do it right away, but you practice. You practice. You practice. By the time the boys and girls are 8th graders, they're quite proficient. Not only in appreciating poetry, but also in being able to write it. Well, if we talk about mathematics, this is not going to end. But I have to brag. I am going to brag. For long, mathematicians knew there were 3 keys to math. You had to know your facts and computation skills like that. Probably many of you, that's the way you got it in school. Then you have to know conceptually, you have to know math. Rate, ratio, percentage, proportion, all kinds of things like that. And then you have to problem solve. So, from the very beginning, how many of you children have wood math books? You know, that crazy thing started in, about 1987. It was the first iteration of wood math. And we just kept improving it. Mike helped take it over. I don't know when you put your 2 cents in, Mike, but he made it better. And now Melissa and Catherine are with the 5th through 8th grade. They have got that book down to a science with the kids. So they are like this with their computation skills, with their facts. But that was all, there was nothing new in that. We went through a period of time where mathematicians said, well, you really don't need to have your facts mastered. You don't have to memorize them. It'll just come over time. And that trend lasted about 20 years. There's a whole generation of people who don't know their facts. I don't know if you're in that generation. But again, it is something that research found is true, the classroom we found is true. And so then it becomes a practice that maybe we started, Elaine and I started, but it's been passed on. And now it's kept up. We have a problem-solving program, elaborate, more than I think I better spend that much more time talking about it. Anyway, you get the idea. I hope Ryan and I have talked about making a video, and I would just like to talk about the history of all these things. It's terrific. It's fun to talk about how it got started, and it grew, and we played with it, and it got better, and it got better, and then we said, here, you do it now. History, I see Connie right there. History Day is a great example. Helene started History Day in 1986, 1984. By 86, we had our first finalist in the Nationals. 3 years after that, you became History Teacher of the Year to the History Channel, right? You had recognition very quickly. Then, our circumstances at home changed. Connie takes it over in 1998. We thought, uh-oh, here we go. Oh, studiously studied everything that Helene did. And she took it even farther. I'll go back to Lorraine. You have no idea. She's probably the most decorated writing teacher in Ohio. And it's all been building and building and building. So then Connie, you had a run until really last year. And then, where's Joe Perino? he shows up. He was in History Day. And now he just picks up the whole thing. And so it is these programs that cause the children to grow and become who we want them to become going into high school, is being passed down from teacher to teacher, starting with the body of knowledge and research that says it's true, and then turning it into practices. So, I don't know how long I talked, and I really don't care tonight. Tonight I'm privileged. But I'm very, very happy. How do you continue this? Well, you can see there's a process for all of our teachers. Dive into it. What's there is good. Learn it. Practice it. Get better at it. And they have. I could point to many instances where our teachers have already taken what Helene and I did and have moved forward with the whole thing. So that kind of thing is going to continue. Now, then, we were still concerned. And one time I proposed to Scott, how about we not have a head of school? I mean, he thought about that for, 2 seconds. I know I could see it on his face, that's stupid. But it's because I had so much confidence in the teachers. I had so much confidence in what they were now understanding and practicing that yes, it could go. But I realized it needs another push. And someone else who would join on what we're doing, and that was the problem. How do we find someone who can appreciate what we're doing, wants to be a part of what we're doing, and has the capacity in his own education, in his own experience, to take it another step? Ryan Woolley falls out of the sky. Actually, we could have done a national search. That came up one time. But Helene and I, after meeting, actually we had Ryan and his wife over for dinner one night and had a nice evening. And then out of nowhere, we both looked at each other and we said, how about Ryan? And just that little light bulb went on. That's it. You got somebody who appreciates what we're doing, wants to be a part of what we're doing. You and I can still sit in the back seat. I can go visit my grandchildren whenever I want. And we have the confidence of somebody who values what we're doing and wants to move it forward. And he will, because he's got the talent and the ability to do it. Both Scott and Ryan will say something to that effect. So that's why I'm quite happy about this whole thing. On one hand you say, well, I've heard this over and over again, even people now when they come in to interview for the school to send their kid, interviews all over and they look at me straight in the eye. How long are you going to be here? And I can say forever. I have an evergreen contract. I can stay as long as I want, unless I'm a bad boy or something. A felony.
Needs to be a felony.
Needs to be a felony. I'll be careful. So we're able to do what we do, work with the teachers, work with children in the back seat, and the school can go forward exactly as it is. Having our professional development and our teachers pursuing ever more how to get better and better and better. So with that, I'll introduce Scott, and he'll say something about Ryan. Thank you again for coming and tolerating my